How are you using AI today?
I'm using coding agents every single day, basically all day.
Do you think there's going to be like a plateau, or do you think like, hey, we're going to reach there?
I would not be surprised if within the next few years, these tools get to the point where they are equal to Hollywood editors who've got tons of experience. Humans are always going to want to be able to look another human in the eye and shake somebody's hand to get a deal done.
Hello there. Welcome to episode 2 of GTM Renaissance. I am joined by
Joseph Damiba.
So I'm Roman. I am one of the hosts of GTM Renaissance.
Very cool. And I'm Thierry and Roman, your other host of GTM Renaissance, developer evangelist at Arcade as well. So let's get into this. Joseph is my brother, and I've known him for a long time, but I've actually never asked you this question, Joe. When is the first time that you remember using a computer?
That's a good question. I think it goes back to we were living in the Ivory Coast in West Africa, capital Abidjan, and our dad got, I think this was a Windows 95 computer, and brought it into the house. And that was definitely my first recollection, because we did a webcam call with somebody in the US, and that was like mind-blowing to me. It was like, dial up 56K, took forever to buffer, but like I could see the other person and talk to them, and that really opened up my imagination about computers and software.
Okay, so that was your first taste of computers, Windows 95. And then when was the first time you remember using AI?
So that was definitely a lot more recently. I think I moved into a group house or co-living house in San Francisco called the Embassy. And one of my housemates, Darren, was like an early adopter of Claude Code. And I think that that's probably one of the first times that I used it for code generation. But I was definitely into like the image generation stuff. Like I remember getting on like replicate.com and doing stuff with like the Flux Pro model that had come out at the time. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like I can just generate images. So definitely started off like with generative stuff and then moved into the like coding agent stuff.
Yeah, and just quick little detour, what was Darren working on with Claude Code that kind of opened up your eyes?
Oh yeah, I think at the time they were building software to evaluate the performance of MCP servers. So like helping people like create evaluations and basically improve the performance of their MCP servers.
Okay, and then how are you using AI today?
I'm using it pretty heavily. I'm a senior software engineer at a startup called Further AI, where we're building an agentic workspace for the commercial insurance industry. And as part of building that product, I'm using coding agents every single day, basically all day. My main driver is Claude Code. But when I reach my quota limit, sometimes I open up the codex as well. So yeah, it's definitely been it's definitely been like a pretty huge transition for me from getting into the industry and like spending all day typing React code to now prompting these agents. I rarely the last time I put in a semicolon or a curly brace was like a long time ago.
So I'm curious. So being a front-end engineer, you kind of feel like when you was younger, did you ever have like a design background or any like graphic design training? You kind of transitioned to that, or was it just start off with that?
No, so I definitely started off more in the like traditional computer science, like software engineering angle. I was lucky to go to a high school in Maryland, outside of Baltimore, that had like a computer lab, and you could take like computer science courses if you wanted to. So I learned about like C and memory management and pointers and linked lists and data structures and all that stuff. It wasn't until after I'd graduated college, and actually I'd graduated from my master's degree program, where I got a master's degree in industrial and labor relations at Cornell, and I was working in human resources management at the time for a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., and just the commute was killing me because I was taking the train from north of Baltimore into D.C. every day, like spending like 3.5 hours on the train, and that really motivated me to like figure out another path that my life could take. And at that point, I kind of looked at my software skills and thought that probably the most straightforward way for me to get into the industry was by getting into the front end world as opposed to the back end world. At the time, it was just like really intimidating thinking about distributed systems and databases and SQL, and just the way that my brain worked, it was a lot easier to like grok. Okay, here's how React works. Here's how the component lifecycle works. Here's how CSS works. And so that was like my first real exposure to programming. I didn't really have a design background, but I think I was really lucky that one of the gigs that I got early on in my career was as an engineer at a data visualization firm called Plotly. And data visualization is obviously very, very heavily influenced by graphic design because we're interested in showing people, accurate visualizations where they can intuitively grasp like what's happening on the graph, right? There's a lot of ways to make a graph like unreadable and very few ways of making it readable. And so like in the company DNA, design and graphic design was like really core to what we were doing. And so I was able to get a really great education sitting next to designers and next to product folks who were like really obsessed with making sure that our application looked as functional as it could be.
I think it's kind of interesting because I kind of go back and forth and kind of trying to think: is front end and like landing pages, is it more of like a science or an art? And like where do you kind of fall within that?
I think it's like it's a weird mix of both because there's definitely some stuff that, we've been making websites and web pages for what 30 years now, and there's definitely been a body of accumulated knowledge that shows, how people interact with websites, like where people's eyes go and how they consume, like this thing that's like a scrollable page on the internet. So I think there's definitely a lot of research that somebody can do to just like understand like, when I go to apple.com, like why does that work? And when I go into like my personal blog, it's less interesting. Like there's definitely some craft to that. But I think, if you look at some of the sites that people love the most, some of those they're not going to be conventional and like working with like what the, style of the day is. Like they're going to be making bold choices, right? They're going to be using different types of design elements and being very opinionated. And so I think in order to stand out from the crowd, right, I think it's really important to have some sort of design sensibility that allows you to, make designs that are really catching to folks because we live in an information and attention economy, right, where if your website or your landing page doesn't grab people's attention within the first 4 or 5 seconds of landing on it, it's very easy for them to just open up a new tab, open up TikTok and get that dopamine fix somewhere else, right? So I think one of the challenges of the role is oftentimes you're making judgment calls just based off of your gut, and it's hard to justify those with data because sometimes if you only made the data-driven decisions, you're going to end up looking like everybody else, right? Whereas especially in the startup world, we're looking for differentiation, right? And so that's like a really key driver.
Right, and just one last question, because I'm sure Terry has some as well. But I kind of, do you feel like the differentiation could ever get to a point where that becomes data driven? Like yeah, like how far do you think you could go on the front end? Because I see a lot of conversations on the front end. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it really comes down to having a really good idea of what type of data to collect, right? Because I think a lot of folks stop at just like the type of stuff that you might be able to get inside of a Google Analytics type platform where it's like, okay, here's how many views I got, here's what my bounce rate was, here's how much time folks spent on the platform. Oftentimes, those aren't going to be metrics, however, that are going to be really meaningful. And so I think when you get to things like using a system, for example, like Amplitude, which is a product that I've used often, that allows you to get like screen recordings of actual user sessions. And then they give you some metrics that are a little bit more relevant to the types of things that we're concerned about. Like, for example, they'll track like the number of times that people like mash a button or like click repeatedly on a button, right? Because those are things that are like, hey, that is a sign that like maybe your UX or your UI isn't responsive enough and people are like trying to get some type of feedback that some action was made, right? And so I think if you're a little bit more judicious about what type of data you can collect, and as we get better instrumentation of web browsers and other third-party platforms, then I think you can start making some more informed decisions for sure.
One question that I have is when you're thinking about these metrics and then thinking about this idea, it kind of sounds like you're almost like a puppet master, if you will, where you're like just thinking about organizing your agents to do the work that needs to be done and you're like deciding what work they should do. How do you pick A, what metrics to choose, and B, how much autonomy do you give your agent to make those decisions versus you kind of being the driver?
So I think it really depends on where the company is at in the life cycle, because at different points in the company's growth, different metrics are going to be relevant. I think at the place where we're at my current startup, some of the things that really matter to us are some of the more metrics around performance. So for example, the time to first byte, right? So how long after a user requests a web page are we able to serve a response back to them? How long does it take for the web page to become interactive after it's loaded? How long does it take, for example, if we're loading a table, right? How many seconds does the spinner spend on their device, right? So I think I'm definitely more inclined to take the driver's seat and like make executive decisions about, hey, here are the metrics that I think are important. In terms of like using the LLMs to decide those metrics, that's not really something that I think I'm comfortable with yet, given their capabilities. I think it is still important for folks in my position, front-end developers, to use the experience that we've gained, working in the industry to try to set those types of precedents, or not precedents, but priorities, right? Other folks on the team have different concerns, right? Like they're working with infra, or they're working with authorization, or they're working on like the agent harnesses. And so the important thing that I can bring to the team is some awareness of like, hey, here's what like a healthy system would look like. And here are some techniques that we can move our application closer to being healthier, right? Because the reality is that at most startups, performance isn't the thing that we're thinking about when we're trying to ship a product to market, right? We're trying to achieve product market fit. But then it can become difficult to scale if the system isn't performant enough to, actually sustain the amount of volume of traffic that you're getting. And so I think it is really important to have folks who have an intuitive understanding of what the types of metrics are that they would need to optimize for. I would worry that if somebody was, putting themselves in a position to like let the large language model decide what the important metrics are, that because the context window is so limited, it might be able to like get, 5% or 25% of the value, but getting to that like 95th or 99th percentile or, orders of magnitude improvements, I think it's unlikely that you're going to be able to get that, at least given the capabilities that there are currently.
I have a question which is kind of a change of subject, but I saw you worked on for a YouTuber,
Yeah.
basically Brian Taylor Cohen. Sorry, I'm not as familiar with his content, but I do have a question around kind of what was driving development, because I understand. So from what I saw, you did a Discord bot, you did various other things. Like, was it like, hey, how do we drive more subscribers? How do we retain people? I'm curious about what the North Star was.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, Brian Tyler Cohen is a politics YouTuber, puts out like, multiple videos a day about, current trending political issues, usually approaching them from like a left of center point of view. And yeah, it was really, really awesome collaborating with him. And I'm still working with him to this day on various projects. So the thing that really drove my collaboration with him was kind of exactly what you're talking about, like being able to offer more value to people so that he can monetize the various channels that he's distributing his content on, right? Because if you think about your average content creator, the things that they're going to be able to do to monetize are, for example, advertising that gets run by the platforms on their content, right? They can have merchandising, but one of the really big ways of monetizing is creating communities and allowing folks access based off of their like status, right? So for example, if you join my Substack, or you become a YouTube member, or you subscribe to my Twitch channel, we're gonna have like a special section for you in the Brian Tyler Cohen Discord, where like we'll have like monthly Q&As, and like you'll have some more direct access to this creator that you're following, right? So it really came from a place of really thinking about how can we drive additional revenue growth, and what are some of the software tools that would allow somebody to do that. So for example, on the Discord bot, right, like actually implementing a bot where folks can, if they've signed up on Substack, or they've signed up on YouTube, or they signed up on Twitch, connect their Discord account to that third-party platform, and then gain access to additional features based off of their like status, right? And then if they cancel their membership, then automatically we change their status based off of that, right? So those are, I think, the driving factors behind it, because a lot of creators, once they reach a certain level of scale, realize that like it's important to be able to offer a differentiated product, right? Like everybody's doing the thing where it's like, hey, sign up for my Kickstarter and I read your name out at like the end of videos, stuff like that. Like folks are kind of getting used to that. And so if you want to offer like something that's more interesting, oftentimes being able to like write custom software that achieves that goal is going to be a way for you to offer that to your viewer base.
Interesting. And just one follow up on the Discord bot. So, because I think me and Terry have done a lot of community stuff. Like I know when I built communities before, the harder part of scaling it was if people join a community, if you're a creator, they usually want to talk to you. And it's like it's really hard to scale that. Did you kind of find like having the Discord bot kind of help that, or did they still like, hey, I just want to ping him and speak to him?
No, I mean, so it helped because as you can imagine, having a Discord with like thousands of
Yeah.
members in it, like you can't provide personalized attention to all those folks. So I think just as a first pass, like just reducing the volume of folks who are looking for that type of one-to-one interaction or allowing members of your community who are more looking for that type of an engagement to give them an outlet and a platform to be able to express that interest is really important. But then it really becomes like being protective of the content creator's time, right? Because at the end of the day, hosting like a monthly Q&A session isn't like the most onerous thing to do, especially if like where, people are putting in questions during the month and we're able to like triage and, really take care of Brian's time. But yeah, for sure, that's something that I think a lot of folks are going to like struggle with is like, what's the ROI of like these kind of like more one-on-one conversations? I think at like the $5 tier a month, like it's probably going to be net negative. But if you're managing to create a community where folks are, putting in, $500 or $1,000 a month, and you can reduce that volume, then it might be something that's a little bit more economically practical.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so I'm curious. So and again, like, completely understandable if you're not allowed to say any of this. I'm curious just because it's like a bit of a GTM focus. I think it's a really interesting angle. So was there any objectives of like repurposing content through the models and like trying to do video editing? Like, have you experimented with any of that?
No, we haven't. I mean, just being in Los Angeles, I think there's, because I moved to the Bay Area from Los Angeles. That's where I met Brian and started this collaboration. There's a lot of that stuff going around, right? I think the luxury that Brian has at the level that he's achieved is that he's got a really, really great editing team. And so those guys are responsible for, taking all the different types of content that he's doing, whether it's interviews, whether it's recorded studio bits, whether it's, longer form content, and then breaking that down so that it can be pushed to the different distribution channels. I think the place where automation comes into the mix is for folks who are less in Brian's position, but like more in the position of like, I'm an editor and I have 50 clients, right, who each want me to turn their, Twitch streams into YouTube videos, right? I think it's at that level of scale that type of automation starts making sense, more like at the agency level than it is at the individual content creator level, because, Brian's expertise basically, or one of the things that has been at the forefront of his media is just like the great high quality production value of what he's doing, right? And at the end of the day, I'm not sure that a lot of the tools that are currently out there can match like an editor who's had 15 years of experience and also has a working relationship with Brian, right? And so I think that's kind of where some of the more automated tools I think fill a niche in the marketplace is for editors and folks who maybe don't have that access to like, the top editors in Los Angeles, being able to ship a product that gets in front of consumers' faces and, drives that attention economy is really, really valuable. So I think if I was working with creators kind of more, less on like a one-on-one basis and more like, trying to service many different clients, then that's kind of where those tools I think would fit in.
Interesting, because I think, at least for me, I think AI can edit or one shot maybe slightly worse than it can do landing pages, but it's still kind of that thing where like, hey, it can do bad ones, but if you want really, really, really good ones, it's not going to do that. Like, do you think there's going to be like a plateau, or do you think like, hey, we're going to reach?
No, I mean, I think just given the acceleration and progress that we've seen over the last, let's say, 18 months, I'm pretty certain that we're going to continue to see that these AI editing and image generation and video generation tools just keep getting better and better and better. I think, just as a society and as a civilization, we're throwing more and more compute at training these models. There's some really smart ML, AI, RL researchers who are like coming up with new foundational paradigms for how to build systems. Like next word prediction isn't like the end of the train, you know, like there's folks getting their PhDs trying to figure out more efficient ways to actually drive natural language output out of computers. So yeah, I would not be surprised if within the next few years, these tools get to the point where they are equal to, you know, Hollywood editors who've got tons of experience. I think the thing that folks need to start thinking about is, okay, if that transition is going to happen, right, how do I position myself to be at the forefront of that transition? You know, how do I stay plugged in to, you know, hear about the latest changes in these models so that when it does come, like I'll hear about it and won't be 6 months behind, right? I think that that's really going to be a crucial differentiator in these next couple of years, is like who's been getting the reps in using these tools every day and is ready to really run with the football as soon as they become more capable than they are, and who's going to be like, oh, I need to ramp up from zero to try to use these tools. I think that the gap between those two populations is going to grow.
Just to switch things a tiny bit, I saw at Clarity you kind of worked a lot on like onboarding, user flow, that kind of stuff. I'm kind of wondering from like a front end and kind of like like process perspective, what kinds of experiments and tips did you say, okay, this really increased X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, for sure. So it really had to do with streamlining the process to have as few clicks as possible to generate as much valid data about our users as possible. So Clarity is a social calendar application, basically, where what we're hoping to do is to onboard users and show them relevant events that are happening close to them geographically, but also within their interests, right? So we really iterated a lot on the onboarding process, from having like one really long questionnaire to breaking that down into multiple screens to finally paring down the number of questions that we're asking, because this was, you know, early on in my exploration of using like vector databases and vector embeddings to create, you know, associations between users, right? Because one of the things that we realize is it doesn't matter if you onboard a user if the user's not actually being shown relevant content, right? So it's important to gather enough content or enough context about them during the onboarding process in order to show them relevant suggestions, right? So we ended up with a system where users would select from a set of tags, basically. They could be like, I'm into art, I'm into history, I'm into music, I'm into cars. Or they could like write their own tags, which would then be added to the database. And then their geographical location and their age. And we were able to use those in collaboration with our embedding model to be able to actually create clusters of users and recommend those users events based off of their interests. So we used an A/B testing framework inside of Google Analytics to be able to basically show different onboarding flows to different users and track their actual eventual adoption of the platform, right? Because our kind of key metric was how long did it take from a user signing up to, you know, posting their first event or attending their first event that was posted on the platform. And so it took a lot of iteration to try to figure out how do we minimize that time. And, you know, obviously from the MVP to like, you know, iterations, we ended up with a bunch of different experiments, and we ended up kind of just settling on the experiment that showed the best conversion rate for the metrics that we were interested in.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I'm curious, did you two work on this together? Just given Terry's background? Or...
No, I think this was one of the things that I was working on kind of solo. It was actually really cool. It's a very classic San Francisco story where I had just moved up here from Los Angeles and was trying to establish myself in the tech community. Started going out to different events, you know, Luma, etc. I met a designer at one of these, and, you know, maybe like 4 weeks later, he texted me on LinkedIn being like, hey, I met this other guy at this other event that I was at. I think you two should connect. And then I connected with the founder of Clarity, and we built the product together. So yeah, definitely goes to show that, like, you know, being in the right place at the right time, surrounding yourself with you know, opportunities for serendipity, like that's what this town's all about. And that was really, really huge to my, you know, personal and professional development, being out here and understanding what it takes to be successful out here.
Definitely. I've got a ton of questions, but I'll give it to Terry.
Yeah, I know we're coming up on time here, but one of the things that Joseph mentioned that I think I want to kind of pull the thread on is this idea of like certain editors are better than AI today, not only because they've been doing it for a long time, but also because they have a relationship with Brian. And I'm thinking about this blog that Simon Williamson just wrote talking about how OpenAI and Anthropic found product market fit. I did a reaction video and blog to that. But more specifically, I'm thinking about a part where he talks about how these big labs, specifically OpenAI and Anthropic, are hiring heavily in GTM roles for actual human beings. So presumably they're pretty AI pilled at these companies, right? I don't have any internal knowledge, but I can only assume everyone has agents and stuff. And they're heavily hiring humans, especially in these enterprise type roles. So for me, that's like huge validation that like, yeah, we love the AI and it's great, it's helpful, but the relationship is really hard to beat, especially when you pair it with experience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, very few people are going to spend tens of thousands or millions of dollars on an enterprise contract for something and not talk to a human being in order to understand what they're getting into, negotiating the contract, making sure that everything works, right? Like the enterprise sales cycle it can take months, 6 months, a year to get an enterprise deal through. And that's not because like folks are dragging their feet. It's because these are very complicated and complex financial and legal transactions that, need to get approved by lots of different stakeholders, right? And so I think the idea that we're going to have agents that are able to perform that dance, it would be amazing. It would be a huge boon economically. Humans are always going to want to be able to look another human in the eye and shake somebody's hand to get a deal done. I would be very surprised if that impulse for, having that type of human connection and being able to trust someone is going to go away. Like, I'm sure that the agents are going to have a huge part to do in like due diligence and communication and negotiations and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if I'm spending, $50 million a year on a product, I want to be able to look the other CEO in the eye and understand that they're going to take care of me and I'm going to be someone that's important to them, right? So I think as these tools get better and better, it might become easier and easier to get to that type of validation, right? Presumably these tools are going to be trained not just on coding, but like on all the other types of activities that folks are doing until their skill set is going to continue to increase. But yeah, I think the skepticism that like, hey, a lot of this stuff is, why should I learn how to, create a great GTM campaign? Like AI is going to be able to do it for me in a couple of years. Like, yeah, I would be very, very skeptical of someone who had that approach. Like, I think you really want to understand how to do it yourself, and that's going to maximize your productivity with systems that can do it, equally or better than you can. But the idea that like I'm going to have no knowledge whatsoever of go-to-market practices or techniques, and I'm going to be able to prompt a next level model to achieve the goals that I want, that's highly, highly unlikely. And I think most folks would be better off, really investing the time and the practice to understand how to do these things and to understand what motivates people to buy things, right? To understand why do people buy certain things over other things, right? Like how are people persuaded to switch from, option A to option B? Those are strategies that I think are going to be pretty evergreen, even as the underlying technological substrate changes.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that was a wonderful closing to this podcast. This was super fun. Thank you so much for joining, Joseph. And thank you,
Absolutely.
Roman, for questions. Yeah, it's interesting kind of when the design and engineering and everything comes together to create this beautiful product, right? It's like a beautiful cacophony. So, Joseph, is there anything you want to shout out?
Hey, if you're looking to automate your commercial insurance workflows, I would definitely encourage you to check out furtherai.com. We're building some software that I think is really revolutionary in terms of reducing the amount of work that people have to do and allowing them to bring the best of the frontier models to their specific domain. So yeah, definitely check us out.
Thanks for coming on GTM Renaissance. We'll see y'all next time.